Have you ever found yourself making a decision based on the first number that stood out to you only to realize later that it wasn't the right choice? That's because numbers can have a sneaky way of tricking our brains. But don't worry, in today's video, we'll unravel the secrets of the anchoring bias and show you how to outsmart those manipulative numbers once and for all. In this video, we'll explore what anchoring bias is, how it affects our decision making, and most importantly, how to avoid being manipulated by numbers. To start, what is the anchoring bias and how does it work? The anchoring bias is a cognitive bias that occurs when we rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive when making a decision. This first piece of information becomes the anchor upon which we base all subsequent judgments. This bias can cause your judgments or decisions to be influenced by the initial number, even if the anchor is completely unrelated to the decision at hand. This is because we tend to give more weight to information that confirms our initial impression and ignore information that contradicts it. For example, let's say you're shopping for a new car. The first car you see is a high-end model with all the latest features, priced at $50,000. You then see a lower-end model for $30,000 and a mid-range model for $40,000. Even though the mid-range model may be the best fit for your needs, you're more likely to choose the high-end model because it's the first one you saw, and it has set the anchor price in your mind. The anchoring bias occurs as a result of our brain's natural tendency to take shortcuts when processing information. Our brain prefers to use heuristics or mental shortcuts to make quick decisions, which is why we often rely on the first piece of information we receive. Unfortunately, this tendency can be exploited by others who want to influence our decisions. So, how does the anchoring bias affect our decision making? The anchoring bias can impact our decision making in a wide range of situations, from making purchases to negotiating salaries. Retailers usually apply the anchoring bias effect to influence our perception of prices. They might display a higher priced item next to a similar, but lower priced one to make the lower priced item seem like a very good deal. In negotiations, the first number proposed can often serve as an anchor that will influence the final offer. If the first offer is high, it can make subsequent offers seem more reasonable, even if they're still high. Also, when making investment decisions, as an investor, you can be anchored to the past performance of an investment and make subsequent decisions based on this anchor, even if it doesn't reflect the current reality. Now that we know how the anchoring bias works, how can we avoid being manipulated by numbers? 1. Be aware of the bias. The very first step to overcoming this bias and avoiding being manipulated by numbers is to be aware of its existence. By recognizing when we're being anchored, we can take proactive steps to overcome this bias. 2. Use a reference point. Another way to avoid being manipulated by numbers is to establish a reference point for comparison. For instance, if you're considering a job offer, you can use the industry standards or your current salary as a reference point for evaluating the new offer. 3. Be mindful of emotional triggers. The anchoring bias effect can be intensified by emotional triggers, like fear or excitement. It's important to be mindful of these emotional triggers when making important decisions and to take a step back to evaluate the situation objectively. 4. Be willing to walk away. Sometimes, the best way to avoid being manipulated by numbers is to be willing to walk away from a deal. Don't be afraid to say no and move on if you feel that you're being anchored or that the offer is not in your best interest. 5. Ask for feedback or reviews. Another way to avoid being anchored is to ask for feedback from others. This can help you get a different perspective on the situation and make a more informed decision. So, while the anchoring bias is a common cognitive bias that can have a significant impact on our decision making, being aware of this bias and taking steps to counteract it will ensure that we make better decisions that are based on more than just a single number. Thank you for watching the video. Please like, share, and let us know your thoughts in comments box.